Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. I'm Paul Kincaid, Director of Congressional Outreach for FMC, the Association of Former Members of Congress. I'd like to welcome all of you to this look at the presidential election 11 days out. For those of you who have missed previous podcasts or episodes of our virtual roundtable, I'd invite you to visit our archive at usafmc.org/sounds. You can check out our other programming and subscribe to Virtual Roundtable as a podcast on Spotify or Apple. This is an interactive discussion today, so if you have a question at any time, just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, fill out your name and question, and if we choose you, our moderator will call on you to ask your question over audio only to our panel. Again, anytime during the call, just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Last night was a far different presidential debate than the first event we saw a couple weeks ago, so much so that the moderator, NBC's Kristen Welker, has received rave reviews for her ability to keep the two candidates on topic. Now, with debates in the rearview mirror, we look at the next 11 days leading to Election Day on November 3rd. Of course, this will be unlike most election days in both the number of people voting and the possibility that we may not have a winner announced. In fact, at both Texas and Florida, more voters have already cast ballots overall than have voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Meanwhile, Iran and Russia have begun open attempts at voter intimidation by email. 2020 continues to be the gift that keeps on giving, and discussions in the final week leading up to election will be different than ever before. We hope to have a great one here today. Moderating our discussion will be former U.S. Rep. Elizabeth Esty. Congresswoman Esty served Connecticut's 5th Congressional District from 2013 to 2019. She served on the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Veterans Affairs, and since joining FMC has been a wonderful contributor to our programming. We have a great pair of congressmen to discuss both last night and the next 11 days. Congresswoman Esty will introduce them to you now, and with that, Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And first, I want to give thanks for the three organizations that are coming here today to host this series: the Former Members of Congress Association, the Congressional Study Group on Japan, which our two guests are well acquainted with, as well as the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. So this is the third and final installment in the series on this year's election. We really have a treat in store today with Eliot Engel and George Holding. George and I were classmates elected in 2012, both of them, and Eliot, a neighbor in New York. I have the pleasure of knowing both of them. They are distinguished public servants, long records of public service in the state legislature, in George's case also as U.S. attorney, and in Eliot's case as a teacher and guidance counselor. And we certainly look forward to getting your guidance today, gentlemen. Again, we will be having a discussion, the three of us, for the first half, and then be opening it up for questions from our audience here. So again, as Paul indicated, please fill in your question on the Q&A, and we will be getting to you in the second half. So I could go on and on about their bios. You've got them, but we've got a lot of ground to cover with 11 days left. So I want to turn it straight over to both of our distinguished panelists. And the first question, which is really for both of you. We're 11 days out. The debates are done. Things are still happening. 50 million people, it appears, have already voted. What are your principal takeaways, each of you, about each of the campaigns at this state of play? Eliot, we'll go by seniority, start with you on this one. And you'll have to unmute yourself, Eliot.
How is that better? Okay. Well, okay. Can you repeat the question?
Sure, Eliot. What we're going to start with is just a couple of takeaways about your takeaways from the campaigns this year, because it's an extraordinary year. A lot of things have happened. These are two white men in their 70s at a point when a lot of other foment is going on in the country. What's your takeaway about the campaigns at this state 11 days out?
There's so many things coming in with the campaign, the virus, everything sort of meshing together, that this is a really abnormal election. It would be abnormal even if Donald Trump wasn't in it. With Donald Trump in it, you kind of never know which way it's going to fall. I was impressed with the fact that the debate was a real good debate, I think, on both sides yesterday. And I think that both sides showed why they want to be elected. it's very interesting to kind of watch it. So every time yesterday, I thought that the president was going to jump out of his chair. He didn't do it. Remember him not only in the first debate, but 4 years ago with Hillary Clinton, when he sort of walked around the room and kind of looked at her in the face and acted very strangely. He didn't have much of that. So I think the debate was good. I think this has been a crazy, crazy election, again, because of the virus and because of so many other things. But I think what's really stellar is that the American people want to vote. They want to participate in this democracy of ours. You know, with all the controversies of the past months and years, there's always people who think, well, maybe the democracy is dying, or maybe there's parts of it that may have been good 100 years ago, but not really relevant now. I think based on the debates yesterday, based on the talks, I think that's been proven wrong, that American democracy, while not perfect, is still the best system in the world. And it's a kind of system that continues to grow each and every year. It's not stagnant, it continues to grow. And so I think these next several weeks are going to still be interesting. I don't think that anybody has a lock on it. I think these things are very volatile. And this is really no election like I've ever seen before, because I think that the president has sort of acted the way no other president has acted before. That kind of throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing. But, you know, I was glued to my TV set like millions of other Americans last night. And that's what's great about our democracy. You know, and I think that, while it's not perfect. There's no system, in my opinion, in the world that's better or equal to ours.
That's great. So championship for democracy, despite all of the chaos and disruption. George, what is your take on this? Again, I think none of us has ever seen a year like this or an election cycle like this. And I'm going to follow up. So to have queued up for you, North Carolina has been one of those places with particular one, but you're going to get a whole question just on that and money. So sort of your takeaway, your 30,000 foot view right now as where we stand today.
Sure. Well, first off, it's great to be with y'all. Good to see both of you. Eliot, good to see you. Eliot and I had the opportunity to travel some when I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee back in the day. And we never made it to Kosovo, a place that's both dear to us from our work. Mine as a U.S. attorney in Kosovo, and obviously Eliot's work is on the Foreign Affairs Committee. But, you know, from a 30,000 foot view, I think back to my first race, and I had a great advisor. His name was Arthur Finkelstein. And Arthur gave me a very important piece of advice, and that's in a campaign, you can always, you know, find more resources such as money. You can find, you know, you can do things to gin up the vote. But one thing you can never find more of is time. And I think on the Trump campaign, my takeaway looking at it 11 days out is they've wasted a lot of time. They wasted some resources too, but time is what they're running out of, and time they can't get any more of. They may be able to get more donors and buy some more TV time, but they wasted a lot of time, you know, figuring out a message that they needed to lead with. And, you know, here we are. And I think the Biden campaign, they haven't really wasted any time, but they've gotten some really good breaks along the way. I mean, COVID is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I mean, it's testing our nation like nothing has tested it before. But in a campaign, Biden's kind of used it to his advantage because he's been able to kind of lay low and you know, not be out on the campaign trail and make some of the typical Biden gaffes. I was a Senate staffer and didn't work with Biden. I worked with one of his good friends on the opposite side. And then Senator Biden, you know, had the opportunity, you give him the opportunity to talk long enough and he'll say some things he trips over, as we all do. But so my takeaway is that one side, the Trump campaign has wasted a lot of time and they're out of it now. And we'll just see how it all plays out. But that's my main takeaway from 30,000 feet up there.
Well, great, George. That is the number one lesson I got from my first campaign manager is, money, nothing can buy you time. And the time is when it's up,
Right.
it's up. And that matters a lot. And especially I think, and I actually vetoed the question on early voting because I think none of us really understand what this means, especially in COVID. So I'm not going to make you predict what the impact will be, because I think we really don't know. This is truly unprecedented. But speaking of unprecedented, the amount of money that is going into races, not just at the presidential level, but particularly Senate races, but actually a lot of House races as well, has been truly extraordinary. And George, you are at one of the ground zeros. There are a couple of them, and certainly North Carolina is seeing that with the extraordinary race between Tom Tillis and Cal Cunningham. What are you hearing from your constituents? What impact does that seem to be having lived through Linda McMahon spending $50 million 2 times in the small state of Connecticut? I know money is not everything. People think it does not ultimately, it can't win an unwinnable race, but it sure can dominate the airways. What are you hearing? Is it changing people's views at all? What's the interplay between the presidential and the Senate, which is often critical to what happens here at the end? We appreciate your perspective.
Sure. Well, North Carolina's got a long history of this. The fact that the first campaign that I ever had anything to do with as a volunteer was 1984. And that was between Jesse Helms and Jim Hunt. And at that time, it was the most expensive Senate race in American history. And I think it was in the $20 or $30 million maybe overall. The last race that Tillis had was over $100 million. And yes, I mean, the money is pouring in, and having the presidential at the same time, in North Carolina being a swing state. When I've been going home at the weekends, I mean, all you see are TV ads. And I tell you, I think the fallout of that is a lot of people are tuning it out. All these ads, one right after another, most of them all sound the same, whether it's coming from a Republican or a Democrat. And they all have that kind of stereotypical kind of campaign music in the background, flashing some headlines, and the angry announcer on there saying this person's bad, what have you. So I think the money pouring in there is not making as much of a difference as you would think. I mean, at some point you reach a saturation level, and I think they've certainly reached that point in North Carolina. Now on the ground, there's more money being spent on the ground that I've observed than ever before. Certainly more than the last race. And I've never had more people. I've never seen more people walking neighborhoods and putting door knockers on the door hangers. That's pretty amazing, and that's something kind of new, and probably something that will make more of a difference than the literally tens upon tens of millions of dollars being spent on television.
Well, that's interesting to hear that there's still the on the ground work, because I think there's been a lot of speculation that because of COVID that might not be happening. But I still believe with you. I think neighbor to neighbor contact, particularly when there's a lot of air cover, actually becomes the only thing people listen to at the end, because they just can't stand to turn on their TV. Well, that is a fascinating view. Now, Eliot, as Mr. Foreign Affairs, I'm going to turn to you and I know you have a lot of views on this, and it's going to be a challenge to distill them, but we've seen during the Trump administration an extraordinary pullback from international agreements and organizations, whether it's the WHO, whether it's the Paris Climate Accords, whether it is the Iran deal, which I know you have actually are not a fan of. What do you think? Where do you think that leaves the ground at the end of this administration? And what does that set? Is that going to endure? Do you think that fundamentally resets, whether it's after 2 terms of Trump or only 1? Does that fundamentally reset the US involvement in the world and fundamentally reset how other countries view the US presence on the international stage?
Well, one of the things that I've really taken to task in terms of this administration is that the United States for years is the leading superpower in the world. Even when we had the battles with the Soviet Union, which was Russia, of course, there was this feeling that the United States was had to be there in order for the good guys to win. What I've seen now with this administration is that President Trump feels that the United States should be pulled out of these organizations, and that these organizations are nothing but bloodsuckers. They take everything from us and give us nothing in return. That's ridiculous, first of all. And second of all, what it really does is it tells people that the United States is no longer going to lead. So if there's a country, a superpower like the US, which is no longer going to lead, then other countries will not gravitate to it. They'll gravitate to those countries which look like they want to lead. And some of them, of course, being totalitarian and not democratic. It's a real problem. We beat back the Russians after World War II. They wanted to take most of Europe and put it under their wing. We fought back and were able to rescue some countries that were at the border, the fringe borders, like Turkey, countries like that. And the United States was very successful. NATO was a very successful alliance. The EU, by pulling back, we're sending a message to the world that you cannot count on the United States because we're erratic. We do one thing one day, and the other next day we change what we supposedly stand for. So I think almost more than anything else on the international scene, that has been the most damaged, as far as I'm concerned. It used to be that American president was the leader of the free world. And now if you ask somebody who's the leader of the free world, they might come up with Angela Merkel, not with Donald Trump. And that's bad for the United States. If we want
do you think that would change, though, if Biden were to be elected? Do you think that would change dramatically, a little bit, warily? What would be your prediction?
Well, knowing Joe Biden, the way I do, foreign affairs was also one of his things that he really knows a lot about. I mean, when he was a senator, when he was vice president, I had many discussions with him about foreign affairs. He knows these issues. He doesn't have to be taught them. And so I think that he will come as president and show that the United States, we want to go back to where we were the leaders, and that when our democracy and the things that we stand for really were admired all around the world. You can't have it both ways. You can't say we want to be a superpower, the superpower, and at the same time we want to extricate ourselves from anything that the world is doing. And I think that's been the biggest mistake, in my opinion, in terms of American foreign policy.
Great. Well, the next question is for both of you, and that has to do with election interference and election security. Certainly a lot of news on that in the last week. Iran has clearly upped its game. You can get a lot of bang for the buck with very little effort, is now apparent. Both of you I know have been, and I'm not going to ask you to disclose classified information, but I know you've both been privy to that sort of information, as I was in Congress. What do you think the opportunity is for Congress, either post-election in a lame duck session or next year, to really kind of address this new and expanding set of challenges with aggressive behavior by countries that are not our friends, who are looking to disrupt our democracy by undermining confidence in elections and pitting us against each other? There hasn't been real successful effort this year. I think a lot of us are disappointed, and I'm sure both of you are disappointed that has not happened. Do you think that can happen? Where do you think the most fruitful places are to start? Eliot, we'll start with you, and then George, have you pick it up from there.
Well, one of the things that perplexes me is that it's so obvious to everybody that the Russians have been the main problem. That's not to say China isn't a problem in other countries, or a problem Iran, but Russia has been the main problem. And we, for some reason, are not going back at them. We're not trying to be tough with them. I can't understand it. I don't understand why the president has cozied up to Putin. It's obvious, and I don't know why. Putin has tried everything to disrupt us, as you mentioned, our elections. You name it, they're trying to disrupt us. And for some reason, they're getting away with it. The whole instance earlier this year involving Ukraine, same type of thing. It's Russia. So I don't know why we are letting them get away with these things. I can only surmise that there's more that meets the eye than what meets the eye in the back rooms. I just think that most presidents, if I were president, I'd be yelling bloody murder at what Putin is doing and what Russia is doing. And then when you compound it by interfering in our elections, I can't think of anything that's more obnoxious. Russia's invaded Crimea, playing games with Ukraine, doing all these terrible things, and then getting to the heart of our democracy by interfering in our elections. That to me should not be tolerated. We should easily say that you've gone too far, draw the line, and if they go beyond the line, then we have to rethink what we're going to do. But I don't understand the president's infatuation with Putin. Can't get it. I can give you some nasty thoughts about it, but
what do you think Congress? What do you think Congress, recognizing obviously foreign affairs is sort of uniquely a province of the president? The president has enormous free hand in that department, especially since I think we could probably all agree that we would believe that the Article 1 branch of Congress has not exercised its prerogatives as much as it ought to in that realm. But setting that aside, there are still things Congress can do. Where do you think there might be opportunities? Trying to be hopeful here, where are there opportunities either in lame duck or in the next Congress to really address this issue, which affects our country as a whole, affects the basis of democracy. So George, I'm going to flip this to you to think about, like, where are there specific opportunities and what do you hear out of the Republican conference? What do you hear from people in your state that would make you think, these are some things that Congress can do and work with whoever the next president is to try to safeguard American democracy? And Eliot, I'll come back to you for like specific recommendations or thoughts you have on that front, which I know you've thought about quite a lot.
Sure. Well, I think once this election transpires, that this is going to be in the forefront of every American's mind. Because these foreign actors, what they want to do is sow seeds of doubt into the outcome of the election. And I'm a person who believes that this election will be in doubt for some time, after November 3rd. And, we'll be in the middle of recounts and contested ballots. And at the same time, our intelligence services are clearly telling us that, you have these foreign actors, Russia, Iran, and China, trying to meddle in the election. I don't think they're necessarily trying to tip the scales to one side or the other. I think they want Americans to be in doubt as to the election. And tensions are running high. The anger level, the intensity level is incredibly high. And so there are going to be folks at the end of this process that think that something has been taken away from them. They're going to think the election was stolen, one way or the other. And I think that there are folks who will take advantage of that. I think there are folks who will just be driven past the point of any reasonable response because of this. So the American people are going to have it in the foremost part of their mind. And as we all know from serving in Congress, when something's capturing the headlines every day and our constituents are angry and calling the office and so forth, then we figure out a way to act. So often things that we can see because, we're vested with all the best information. So, we really need to work on that. It's kind of hard to corral the consensus in Congress to come together and say, we need to work on this. But I think that people will be focused enough, and that will focus the minds of the incoming Congress that something absolutely needs to be done. And I would certainly like to know from Eliot the specific things that he thinks that we can work on in Congress, which are in the province of the Foreign Relations Committee to Foreign Affairs Committee to get something done.
So Eliot, that's a great entree to you on where, particularly in the very powerful position you have as chairman of the committee, what are some relatively low-hanging fruit, as we refer to it in the legislative things, where there might be low-hanging fruit post-election to say, look, nobody is served by having this much chaos and doubt about the integrity of our electoral process.
What we've tried to do on the Foreign Affairs Committee is to make it as bipartisan as it can. When I was ranking member for 6 years, along with Congressman Royce, who was the chairman, we worked that way. And now Mike McCall of Texas is my ranking member, and I'm the chairman. And we all say the same thing, that politics should stop at the water's edge. That it's very important for other countries to not see any kind of bad divisions amongst Americans when it comes to foreign policy, because you know that the Russians and the Chinese, and they're all working out there behind the scenes to try to bring down our democracy and make it very, very difficult. So I think it's very important that the world see that we are united. It doesn't mean we agree with all the policies, but we are united in terms of our democracy. And so I think that that's important, and you don't show that you're united if you sort of turn your back to the problems of the world. That's why I think that we should be very much involved with it. So I think that should be consistent. I always say, politics stops at the water's edge. And that's the way we can make sure, because our adversaries that wish to do us harm, they don't wish to do Democrats harm or Republicans harm. They want to do our country harm. And that's why we have to stand together. Yeah, we have differences, but the differences pale by comparison. We are fortunate to live in the greatest democracy in the world. And there are other countries that want to bring us down. We need to work together in order to thwart other countries doing that. And I think that, again, on the committee and the way foreign policy is conducted by who's ever president of the United States, we need to really show a united front.
Well, that's a perfect segue to the next question, which is predictive in nature and inherently speculative. So Eliot, if you have inside information, I'm not going to ask you about cabinet picks because I think that's unwise to do, but asking about direction. So let's imagine we have a Biden presidency in a few months. We certainly have some idea of who some of the top advisors have been during the campaign. What do you, both of you, think? Two questions. I want Eliot, you to focus more on what you think the direction would be. What would be the initial things that you would expect a Biden administration to take on as top priorities in the foreign policy front? And George, what do you think the Republican response is likely to be to that? Both where you agree with Eliot's characterization, which my guess is you probably will, because I don't, given how long Joe Biden's been around, it's no big surprise about what his orientation is. And having been VP for 8 years, he traveled the world quite a lot. I think we can probably speculate pretty well about what those priorities would be. What do you think the likely response would be to that? Is it going to be a little bit more of a return to the politics stop at the water's edge? Or are we at a point now, and do we expect the composition of the Congress on the Republican side, which is, I think, likely to be, well, there may well be QAnon members, and that's not something we've had in Congress before. Is that going to change what the response might be in Congress, or would you expect that a return on the foreign policy side to return to a little bit more of the traditional sort of comedy and respect for we fight within the US, but once the decision is made internationally, we go from there. So Eliot, give us your crystal ball of what it looks like on foreign policy in sort of broad strokes, and George, what your crystal ball is about what you think, and that could be majority or minority. I mean, it's still going to be a position, right? The strength of it will be different depending on exactly what positions are held in the Senate in particular. But I'd be very interested in your expectation of what might happen. So Eliot?
Well, I think the most important thing we need to do, and I think that Vice President Biden would agree, is that we need to rebuild our alliances. Right now, NATO or other alliances are shattered. And that is not that doesn't bode well, I think, for the United States. It's not a matter of saying, well, the hell with all of you. We're sick of spending our money. We're sick of you taking advantage of us. we could all vent our frustrations, but the truth of the matter is, I liked it when the United States clearly was the leader of the free world. I liked it when we strengthened our alliances and showed, Russia and countries that would be our adversaries that we are united and we're gonna do good things. I was very involved in the Balkans wars of the 1990s. In 1999, NATO bombed the Serbs in Kosovo, which saved a million lives, drove the Serbs out of Kosovo. To me, that was the NATO in its finest hour. And I think that we need to, you can't hide from these things and put your head under the pillow and pretend they don't happen. No one anoints us as the leaders of the world. We have to go out there and show them why we're leaders, why we think the other countries should follow in our footsteps, and never be duped by the fact that we think countries like Russia and China are our friends, because they're not. That's why you need American involvement in diplomacy, and that's why we need to show that America is still the leader of the free world, and that the leader of America is the leader of the free world, the leader of NATO, the leader of all these other alliances. I mentioned Kosovo before because I'm very familiar with that country, having been there many times. We prevented genocide in 1999 by the NATO bombing and United States involvement. We saved probably 1 million lives there. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that I early on acted up about it, saying that we should be involved and to do these things. I want to get back to those days. Not that I want us to have more than bite off more than we can chew. Not that I think we can be the policemen of the world or that we have money that's never ending. But the fact is, we stand for something. The United States of America stands for something. And with all the difficulties and all the problems, we still have millions of people wanting to come here and live and become American citizens, and they're still trying to do it. I've been to some of these swearings in, with refugees who finally got their American citizenship. So we need to get involved in the world, not because it benefits the world. I think it benefits democracy and it benefits us. You can't be a leader if you don't want to lead. You can't be a leader from behind. You got to be a leader from in front. And that's what I think we need to move during the next several years. We've got to strengthen NATO. We've got to repair any damages with our allies and show once again that America is the leader of the free world.
Thank you, Eliot. And I think certainly Vice President Biden has talked a lot about restoring alliances with particularly in Europe with NATO and our closest allies, and resetting our priorities in that way. And those problems have certainly not gotten better in the intervening time. George, what do you think? What do you anticipate if Biden is elected president? And obviously that may make a difference whether it's by the skin of his teeth or whether it's by a whopping big margin. But if he is indeed inaugurated on January 21st, what do you think, what kind of reception do you think in the foreign policy realm he would be likely to face, assuming, as Eliot has laid out, a pretty traditional democratic foreign policy of heavy engagement with allies, probably looking to get into the Paris Climate Accord, probably reconsidering the Iran deal, but above all, re-entering as an international multilateral player, strengthening our relationship with NATO in particular. What would you expect the response to be within Republicans in Congress?
Well, first off, our adversaries use to their advantage when we internally are divided politically on foreign policy. I think that's one of the things that folks who have come before us have understood, and that's why they've said, listen, our political differences end at the water's edge. We need to unify around foreign policy. I really enjoyed being on the Foreign Affairs Committee because it is probably the most bipartisan acting committee, or used to be, in Congress. And when I was a Senate staffer, my boss was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and he worked really well with his ranking member, which for a period of time was Joe Biden. And But I think that ship has sailed. In the last 10 years, foreign policy has become incredibly political. And that's because folks on both sides of the aisle have become, they distrust us as politicians, as policymakers so much. It is very difficult to make the case to, these really partisan constituencies that, hey, this is good for America. This is, we're doing this for the betterment, of the world and the United States. So I think foreign policy is going to remain very politicized going forward. And if Vice President Biden even if he went back to, all of his positions in the 2000s when he was still in the Senate, I don't think that brings Americans back together and we're going to say, all right, we're going to trust our leaders with foreign policy. I think it's going to remain a very, very contentious issue, and our adversaries will continue to take advantage of that. I think it's just where we are, as a nation and as a people right now. It's not a good thing, but I think in reality, it's just where we are.
Well, George, I think that's really important that you flag that, because I think a lot of times people focus on Congress disagreeing and being disputatious without recognizing that's often what constituents want people to do. That it is not all top down by a long shot, and that if constituents, based on what they believe, what they see, what they listen to, the social media they read, are actually can be much more extreme than their members are in terms of what they want to see happen. So thank you for flagging that, because I think a lot of times that is not apparent to people how much that has changed. And I think that definitely has changed, and regrettably, I agree with you that I'm sad, in agreement with you, that I don't think that's going to change on a dime, because I think we've now had at least 10 years of this, of pretty much everything being politicized. We've got questions coming in. The last one, which is relatively short, but was in a lot of ways one of the cores of that split, George, I think, was around trade policy. So
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about trade policy, because that certainly was a huge issue. If you saw, in 2010, 2012, issues around trade policy did become one of those wedges, is one of the reasons Donald Trump won. And what do people think is going to happen? Again, imagine you have a Biden presidency, but Biden was, although from Scranton, helped lead, efforts for more open trade. There's been kind of a flipping of the parties in many respects around trade. Do you think that will continue because the table's been reset, as the entire table has been reset, and everybody has to be wary about trade? But how are we going to open other markets if we don't have free trade? So what's your both prediction and what would you like to see? And I would really like you both to talk a little bit. You're both wise and smart and experienced, and sadly the US Congress will not have the benefit of that, at least for the next 2 years. What would you like to see? What do you think the right direction would be for the US to follow, given where we are right now? So we'll start with you, George, on this one, and then back to you, Eliot, and then we'll turn to questions.
This is it's really fascinating, because what Trump has done is he has basically flipped the traditional Republican feelings and positions on trade on their head. This was happening starting in 2010. As you recall, all the debates we had in trying to pass Trade Promotion Authority. That's when it started looking like, well, Republicans, maybe they're not free traders anymore. And it started to become very complicated. And then Trump comes along and really turns the Republican free trade kind of doctrine on its head. So, I think if Biden is fortunate enough to win, he comes in, I think he's going to look to reverse things, a lot of the things that Trump has done. But when it comes to trade, if he reverses what Trump has done, you really get back to the traditional Republican free trade platform. And that's not where Biden was as vice president. You recall, that's not where Clinton was when she was running for president. So that's gonna be incredibly interesting. It is, if we go back to the traditional Democrat model of feelings about trade, it's really difficult. You look back, I mean, from North Carolina, we had a lot of history with NAFTA and CAFTA. Several members of our delegation, Republican members lost their election because of that. The famous one, Eliot's former colleague, Robin Hayes, is a member from North Carolina and voted for, I think it was CAFTA, was like the deciding vote. And, he's a staunch Republican, and he was voted out of office by Republicans. Because of that vote, he stood up for Republican values, but his district, was a textile district and was voted out by Democrats. So if it's if Biden wants to reverse what Trump is going to do, Biden's going to have to reverse where he's historically been. So that's going to be fascinating.
Yes, I represented one of those swing districts, which again, none of the Republicans running against me ever were in support of free trade either, because these manufacturing districts, just NAFTA left such a bad taste in their mouths, which we can have a long discussion about how much globalization is responsible for much of this as opposed to trade policy, but it is associated in the public mind at this point. Eliot, what would you like to see? What do you think is going to happen? What would you like to see happen to try to get benefits of trade and recognize we don't want the downside?
The interesting thing was when Donald Trump became president and started to rant against these trade deals. The irony was that these were the trade deals that the Republicans liked and pushed and voted for, and the Democrats, working with organized labor, were against. So everything was kind of flipped on its side. It was really, really very, very interesting. And that's why I think it's important to deal with the issues, not the political things over the issues, but involved with the issues. Because if you keep flipping and flopping because you're playing politics, that does not help, in my opinion, America with its foreign policy or to show strength. And again, the positions that Donald Trump took when he became president had been the Democratic Party positions for all the years. So it's really just been crazy. I think we mentioned the free trade agreement before, and I opposed it. But once it was passed, I thought that it should stay, and we should continue to work with it, because it's not a good thing if, when one person is president and represents a side, and people vote that way, that suddenly in the next Congress, suddenly they flip because the House is flipped or something like that. If we don't show our allies and our adversaries that when we negotiate something and a new Congress comes along, we stick to it, I think it's going to be much to our detriment. You can't, who's going to want to negotiate with us if the president, any president, has a 4-year term, and at most it has 8 years. So I think we have to be consistent. It can't be bouncing back and forth from left to right, doing one thing differently because the other side did it a certain way, and the other side wants to go against what was done. So what I'm trying to say is, when we lead, we have to show the world that it's not a matter of herky-jerky, we're all over the place, but that if something is negotiated and voted on and passed, then maybe we ought to give that a little, see how that works before we try to destroy it.
Well, great. Well, thank you both. I'm going to turn to our questions right now, and a reminder for everyone who's attending, if you have a question for our panel, you can click down at the bottom on the Q&A button and type your question in, and we'll call you. We have one right now from our FNC partner, Itochu, and Aki Nakazono. You had a question on polling. I had actually taken that question out, kind of guessing somebody would want to ask that question. So if you are unmuted, which it looks like you are,
Yes.
thank you for joining us, and please go ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Aki Nakazono with Itochu. Thank you very much for both congressmen for sharing your information, which was very helpful. My question is, we only have 11 days to go before the election. And we've been seeing a lot of polls, figures and statistics. It's just by looking at those, it looks like Biden's got is leading so much, even in the battleground state, and even considering some of the margin of error, which is like 3 to 5%, it looks like he's winning. So, but at the same time, we have a trauma from 2016. So, if Trump were to win this election, what are we missing? What are we missing from this polling or any other stuff? Or any special things waiting from now for the next 11 days?
All right, who wants to tackle that one first?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll say a
This
little
question
something about,
everybody gets because everyone is trying to figure out. I
yeah,
moderated the
a
polling discussion.
I'll say a little something about it. So I used to work for Jesse Helms, and Senator Helms was a conservative icon, and he was elected to Congress 5 times, and he elected the Senate. He always underpolled. It was a consistent problem with his polling because he was a divisive figure for a lot of folks, and people would answer the question and they wouldn't say they were going to vote for him, but they actually were going to vote for him. And Trump's got the same problem. So I think a lot of the polling that you see is kind of undercounting Trump votes. Now, whether it's undercounting enough for him to win in some of these swing states, I don't know. But I know in North Carolina, where most recent polling has it absolutely neck and neck, I can guarantee you that Trump is at least 2 or 3 points higher than what he's polling at in North Carolina. And I think that's going to bear out, in other parts of the country as well. Now, admittedly, in some of these polls, that gap is getting bigger and bigger. And as we started out the hour talking about time, time is running short to make up that distance. But I do think there's some underpolling going on.
I also think we have to remember that we don't get elected, we don't elect a president in the United States by popular vote. There's an electoral college that Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, but didn't win because he won more states and had more electoral college votes. And I think that also throws a monkey wrench into things. I would be, this has nothing to do with politics, that I want to see one side win or another. I think we have a tradition in this country, one person, one vote. And I don't think that a vote in Mississippi should count more than a vote in New York. I think everybody votes. You should have one vote. I think the Electoral College should be abolished. I think it's it makes a state like mine, New York. Nobody wants to come and campaign in it because everybody assumes it's going to go Democratic, and therefore no one wants to campaign there. I think that let's also remember that at this time 4 years ago, everybody felt that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And so I don't think that this race is over by any stretch of the imagination. I think a lot can happen in 4 or 5, in 2 weeks actually now, but 4 or 5 days, and things move quickly. So I think we have to understand that the polls show a popular vote, but it doesn't necessarily should reflect how we elect our president with the Electoral College.
Great, thank you. And Aki, I can tell you one of the differences with a son who's a pollster, who tells me one of the key differences, however, is that there's a lot more battleground state polling this go around than last time. So it is likely to be more accurate, but I think George's point is right. I certainly see that in Connecticut, that I think there is still the Trump voter who doesn't want to say they are. And I think that's still an issue. So I suspect it's undercounted too. I would join you on that. I wanted to, while we're waiting for more questions, and we welcome your questions, this is your chance to plumb the depths of these two political minds. Let's talk for a minute about START. And
Doc.
I think she froze.
Yeah.
Well, Elliot, let's talk about start. Why don't you start out, and I'll join after you.
I thought we were going to talk about the World Series, actually. This gives
All
us
right, well, we can do that.
Go.
Why don't you
go first, George. Go ahead.
I'm certainly in favor of anything we can do to prevent nuclear proliferation. I think Ronald Reagan had it correct early on: trust but verify. And I think the Russians and Putin and so forth are worse than the Soviets were when Reagan said trust but verify. So I'm all for trying to have some of these negotiations, but our verification needs to be even more than it's ever been in the past. And plus, there's so many different. I mean, with technology being the way it is, it's not only about nuclear proliferation. I mean, we're talking about internet hacking and so forth. And these countries, whether it be Russia, China, or Iran, for very little money, they can be just as disruptive to our economy than having a nuclear threat. So those are just some thoughts off the top of my head.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And that's why, again, I think it's so important that the Congress works together in foreign policy and doesn't let the Russians divide us or think they've divided us, or the Chinese or the Iranians or any country that would be our adversary.
And Congressman, from FMC headquarters, this is Paul. I can take over till Congresswoman Esty returns. A lot of our stakeholders and a lot of discussions we've had have cycled around not just the election, but what comes after it. From what you've been able to tell from the discussions that have been had in the U.S. Capitol, what are the prevailing thoughts of your colleagues on what the transition of power might look like if there is a transition between the Trump administration and a Biden-elect administration?
Well, one of the things that's really, really bothered me, I've been in Congress now 32 years, so I've kind of seen it for a long time. Now I'm the chairman of the committee. Obviously, when I started, I was sort of a backbencher. I think we've evolved. Our politics has evolved, not necessarily for the better. There is more hatred. There's more on both sides where people are looking at the other side as an enemy. I think that's very bad to do that. We're all Americans. We have differences of opinion. I know I went to Washington with pure thoughts to try to see what I could do to help effectuate change or help our country. And I think that what's evolved is bitterness and people not working together. There used to be in Washington where members brought their families if their families were young, and their families would be around Washington. Now very few people bring their families, and I think that that's not a very, very good thing. I think that we have to understand that our country is one country. We may have differences of opinion on issues, and that's healthy. That's what a democracy is. But we have to at all times understand that when our adversaries are attacking the United States, they're attacking all of us. They don't care, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever. And I think it's important when we can get together. Foreign policy should be as bipartisan as we can make it. And I think that that's really, really important to remember. And that's what I've always done on the Foreign Affairs Committee, to try to find where we can have boxes of agreement and show our adversaries, or would-be adversaries, that they're not going to succeed in terms of trying to bring our democracy down.
So, George, sorry, internet failure here. It happens.
That's okay.
Suddenly,
I was going to agree with Eliot.
Good.
I first came to Washington to work in 1989, and I'd worked on some campaigns. That's all partisan, and you get your blood up in a campaign. And when I came up here, and I came to work for Helms, I was stunned to find out that Jesse Helms's best friend in Congress was Senator Paul Simon from Illinois. Their offices were side by side. And whenever Helms would get like a school group in or whatever, the first thing he wanted to do was take them over to Senator Simon's office. And he'd take them over there, and Senator Simon would take groups over to Helms's office. And it just shocked me. But, observing, I found that that's actually how they got things done. They could go down to the floor and have civil debate. Sometimes it was heated debate, but it was never unkind debate. And at the end of the day, maybe one of them got 70%, the other got 30%, or vice versa. But the difference between today and then is that at that time, Senator Simon or Senator Helms could go back to his constituents and say, we fought the good fight and we did the best we could, and this is a good deal. And they'd all nod their head and say, Jesse, we trust you, and we hope you do better next time, but we'll take this, keep up the good fight. And today, there are very, very few. It's hard to find any member who can go home and tell their constituents that this is the best deal and you ought to take it. So.
Well, I think that is truly one of the challenges, and that's one of the reasons why the Congress will be poor without the two of you, because I think the current incentives right now do not encourage that kind of bipartisan getting to a 60% for one side and a 40% of the other, which is way better than zero for both. And we're going to have to find a way to get to a point where people are willing to take less than everything, because otherwise you wind up with nothing.
You know what happens also? If you don't know, if you are a member of one party and a member of Congress, and other than people in your home state who are from a different party, or maybe meeting some people from the other party in the gym, in the house gym, or maybe having traveled with them. But by and large, if they're not on committees on which you serve, you don't get to know them. You may recognize their faces, but you don't really get to know them. And when you sit down and get to know somebody, perceptions change. And I know I've felt that way, and I've tried to implement myself that way, to walk over and just be friendly to people from the other party. But it doesn't happen as much as it used to happen when I first got to Congress. And I think that's a shame. I think we need to make sure that we are working together, because we're all Americans. We have different policies, different ideas. We're all Americans. Not one of us is not more patriotic than the other. We're all patriotic. At least I hope so. But I think so. But that's the problem. What part of the problem? You don't know each other. You don't know families. You don't know what colleagues in other areas of the country go through, because I have an urban district. I don't understand what may go on in a farming district, let's say. So I listen to the people who represent those areas and I make my opinion. But I think there's too little of that, in my opinion, going on these days.
Well, we have a quick lightning round. We've got about 2 minutes left. We've gotten a question through of predictions in Senate and House. So given how little time we have, what's the biggest question probably is what happens with the Senate? What's the margin? Who controls and what's the margin? And what happens in the House? Do Dems pick up seats? I think it is highly unlikely. I think we can agree that Republicans would pick up the House, but what do we think happens to margins? So George, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of tight races out there. I think it's kind of absolutely down to the wire. I think it's going to be difficult for obviously Republicans to regain the majority in the House, although I don't think we're going to lose seats. I think we're going to net out some seats. I think you're going to lose a couple that you didn't think you were going to lose, and we might lose a couple that we don't think we're going to lose. But I think we're going to net out and be about where we are. In the Senate, I think the Republicans will keep the majority in the Senate. It'll narrow some, but I think it will keep the majority in the Senate.
Eliot, what's your take?
Well, I disagree with my good friend George. I think that the Senate's going to flip and be under Democratic majority control. I think the House, we will get even more seats and more of a margin for Democrats than we have now. Particularly if Joe Biden wins, I think there's going to be coattails And I think it's going to be, it's going to work in lockstep. I don't think it's going to be you elect Biden president and therefore you elect Republican Senate and House. I think the Democrats are going to do extremely well. And then Democrats will have to show that we can govern. And if we can't, then 4 years, we'll be sitting here saying the same things. But I think it's going to be a big night for the Democrats.
All right, then, right at 4 o'clock. Well, again, I want to thank you, Eliot. Thank you, George, for your years of service to your states and to the country, and wish you all the best, and a little bit of sleep between now and Election Day, although it's a little less stressful when you're not on the ballot. To all of our three sponsors, to FMC, to the Japan Study Group, and to Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Thank you all very much for sponsoring this series. We're delighted to be able to close this out 11 days ahead of the election. If you are a registered voter in the United States and haven't yet voted, please get out there and do that. And stay tuned. I am sure we are going to have post-election analysis, and there are a few more FMC events next week, which we urge you to tune into. And again, thank you both very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. And thanks to all of our participants for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for having George as well. George is one of the nice guys that I was talking about before, one of the people that you could always work with and be friendly with, and he cares more about our country than he does about partisan political stuff. And that's why you can get a left-wing Democrat and a right-wing Republican as being the best of friends and working together, because we're all here, we're all Americans, we all love this country.
I agree with everything you said.
Thank you, sir.
Especially how wonderful George is.
Right.
Again, thank you both very much. And thanks to everyone for joining us here this afternoon. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay well, and stay tuned.